Now, as humans, we have an unbelievable tendency to suffer more in our imagination than we do in reality. And now I was someone that used to get lost in my thoughts and inside of my mind all the time. Until I ran across this idea that I'm going to be sharing with you today. I promise you, this is some life changing stuff. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Now, I want you to imagine that you are inside of your own mind, and that your mind is an empty room with only three objects. There's a chair, and then there's a big screen, and then there are also clouds. Now, I want you to imagine that you are inside of this room and that you're sitting on the chair, the same way I'm sitting on a chair right now. And you're looking at this huge screen. Now, this huge screen represents your present life. So, for example, if you're walking in a park, this screen would show the trees, you'd hear the babies crying, the birds singing, all this stuff. Essentially, it shows the present moment. And the seat that you're sitting on is called the seat of consciousness. And now here's where the clouds come in. The clouds represent your thoughts. They represent thoughts about the past, and they also represent thoughts about the future. And now while you're sitting on the seat of consciousness, trying to look at the big screen to live in the present moment, these clouds, they come all over the screen and they represent all our thoughts, the negative ones, the positive ones, the things that make us feel anxious, the things that make us feel scared, past memories that we don't like, future worries that we don't want to think about. These clouds, they come in and they cloud the view that you have of the present moment. Now, when these clouds start to block the screen, our natural tendency is to get off the chair, walk up to the clouds, and start to move them away. But it's actually at that exact moment when we leave the seat of consciousness and start to get closer to the clouds that we get lost in our own minds. And now let me explain. Now you see, the moment you leave the seat of consciousness and start to get close to the cloud that's bothering you, the more likely you are to have a fogged vision because you start to get lost in the cloud. So for example, I get this all the time. I wake up in the morning and I'm like sitting on the seat of consciousness because I've acknowledged that I've just woken up. But then I get a thought that bothers me. So for example, I have an imaginary argument with one of my friends or an imaginary argument with someone from work. Now, instead of just sitting on the seat of consciousness and observing this cloud or this thought, I find myself getting up from the seat, going to the cloud or the thought and trying to understand it, and I find myself living a full scenario without anything happening in real life. It's all in my mind. So when we get up from the seat of consciousness and we go to the cloud and we try to fix it and we try to play around with it, that is exactly the moment we're no longer in the present and we're lost in our thoughts. So when I read this idea and I started to think about it on my own, I tried out an experiment. I tried, when waking up, instead of going and walking to the cloud, I stayed on the seat of consciousness and I just observed it. And I realized that when I stayed on the seat of consciousness without trying to get rid of the cloud went alone or went away on its own. So that's exactly what we want to do. We want to try our best to stay seated on the seat of consciousness. We're gonna get these clouds or these thoughts throughout our day that will try to block the screen that is the present moment. And now in an ideal world, we want to stay seated on the seat of consciousness and just observe these clouds, allow them to pass away. And I promise you, the more you sit on the seat of consciousness and merely just observe these thoughts, we can't control what thoughts we get, but we can control what we do when the thoughts come up. So when these thoughts are coming and you just allow these clouds to move and you try to focus on the big screen that is the present moment, I promise you, you will find yourself suffering way less and you'll get way less lost inside of your own mind. Because the moment you leave the seat of consciousness and you go to the cloud and you try to push it away, you try to go inside of it and try to fix it and try to do all these things, that is exactly the moment that you rob yourself of the present moment. And by the way, I'm not saying that we should always be seated on the seat of consciousness, observing the clouds and expecting them to go away on their own. I wish life was that simple. But what I am saying is that we shouldn't be engaging with every cloud that comes up. We shouldn't get up from the seat and run to every cloud that comes up. If we do that, we're gonna be lost inside of our own minds. Imagine you're sitting down on the seat and every time you see on a cloud, you're running to the cloud trying to fix this one. You fix this one, you go to another one. You fix that one, you go to the other one. The cycle will never end. But what I am saying is that we want to try our best to stay on the seat of consciousness. And then if we realize that there's a cloud or a thought that keeps coming up every day, all the time, we can then start to investigate that thought a bit more. But the difference is that when we investigate that thought, we want to investigate it from the seat of consciousness. Because the moment we start to get super close to the thought and we get so attached to it, we get lost in the thought. And when you're lost inside of the cloud or the thought, you're going to have a blurred vision because you're going to be inside of this cloud. You won't be able to see around you. You're going to be so lost inside it. So the goal is to be seated on the seat of consciousness, to try your best to live in the present by looking at the big screen. And if you find that these clouds are coming, try your best to observe them and they will pass alone. And if you find one that keeps coming and keeps getting repeated, then maybe it's worth observing that cloud. And now maybe I can make another video about how we can observe a cloud without getting invested on it or invested in it. So let me know in the comments below if this is something that you would be interested in. Now I know this is way easier said than done. This is like one of the most difficult things to do in life, to be able to just sit down on the seat of consciousness inside of your mind without going into the clouds and trying to fix your problems and trying to live in the present. We're talking about some of the most difficult things to do in this world. But merely being aware that there is a seat of consciousness and that these thoughts are clouds and that we are not our thoughts will help us when we start to get lost inside of our own minds. I genuinely hope that this video has given you something to think about, because honestly, ever since I've been introduced to this idea of the seat of consciousness and the clouds that like take us away from living in the present moment by looking at the big screen, like so much has changed inside my mind and I've been getting way less lost inside of my mind and I've been able to be way more present. Because as humans we suffer more in our imagination than we do in reality. Like I always say, this is the Debo's way. I hope you find your own way. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day and I'll see you soon. Peace.